Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where I'm busting out my gaming backlog one video at a time and letting you know if after all these years, these games are worth playing today. In this episode, we're traveling back to a time when my love for rollerblading wouldn't have been laughed at, in Jet Set Radio Future. Wait, it came out in 2002? Never mind. I've been told by those close to me that rollerblading is back in style and cool again, and I repeat those words to myself as often as I can. But it's too hot for me to exist outdoors any longer than it takes me to check the mail, so I've decided to push all physical activity back in favor of digitally skating. Could this have anything to do with my excitement for a certain indie game that seems to be a continuation of the Jet Set Radio series in all but name? Yeah, absolutely, that's a big part of it. But at least one of you told me I should play this game. This sequel, Jet Set Radio Future, came at a transition point for Sega. It was 2002 and the Dreamcast had only been discontinued the year prior, after a shockingly short life of only 2 years and 5 months, and that's coming from the Japanese console launch that was almost a year earlier than the rest of the world. But Sega quickly pivoted and put out 17 games across the other consoles at the time, only a year later. And sure, several of the games were yearly sports titles like NFL 2K2 and 2K3, which were put out in the same year. And others were ports of existing games like Shenmue 2, but without a console to worry about, Sega apparently had enough free time to release several sequels to their Dreamcast games, with Crazy Taxi 3, Panzer Dragoon Orta, and of course, Jet Set Radio Future all coming out in 2002. And if you'd like more of an in-depth history of the developer Smile Bit and the Jet Set Radio franchise in general, go pay a visit to the more than 200-day younger version of myself talking about this first game. With all this out of the way, let's move on to the game in question, look at how it compares to that first game, and what it's like to boot this game up 21 years after its release. It really shouldn't come as a shock to anyone that the people who brought you Jet Set Radio provide more of that stunning style in this sequel. Its visuals are refined with more detail in the characters, animation, and landscapes, plus the extremely distinct soundtrack from the first game continues here with more music of a type I've never heard outside of this series, and I couldn't imagine a more perfect fit for this retro future aesthetic. Now, I do wonder which game people most prefer from a visuals perspective, because they are a little less retina-burning bright neon than the first game with a slightly more subdued look this time, but it's by no means bland or realistic. I think it looks a little more cohesive from level to level, and even though it's not identical to the first entry, Future has a style that stands out as distinctly Jet Set Radio, but I could see the visual changes being a little divisive, with some preferring the brighter visuals and thicker outlines of the first game. Speaking of that first game, almost everything that I found frustrating or disliked has been addressed in some way, and I think it makes for a great feeling game. To me, the movement felt more fluid, with me having an easier time landing on the rail that I was aiming for, pulling off big combos, and most of all, being able to exit half pipes easily. Plus, the game teaches you so much more about the mechanics here, with a whole suite of tutorials you can choose to do if you'd like more tips, which unlock as the game progresses, with this helpful robot calling you over to teach them right before they're actually needed. If you played the first game, you might remember the dash, which to me felt less like an increase in speed and more of a fire hazard with more arm movement. But now you gain a noticeable increase in speed accompanied by your entire screen melting and blurring in a way that's probably going to look like a mess with streaming compression applied to this video, but it's so much more effective at conveying your speed and actually giving you the speed. And honestly, it might be a little too powerful as I regularly lost control and hit walls. Now, the dash in the first game did cost you nothing, but it felt like you got what you paid for, and this one costs 10 cans of paint, but it's so worth that trade-off, and it adds an extra level of strategy as you'll be actively weighing when you can spare the extra paint versus when you can't. The last and maybe most important thing this game does to improve over the first is that it changes how tricks and how the general non-dashing speed of your character works. In the first game, you'd basically be hopping non-stop, as hopping off a rail or a wall would do a trick, and then if you landed on another rail or another wall, your speed would increase by a little bit. But it took me a while to get the hang of this and even realize that's how speed was increasing. Thankfully, this game introduces a little speedometer in the bottom right of your screen, showing you in real time that when you jump, your speed decreases, and when you do a trick, your speed increases, which was really helpful for me since it's been a while since I played that first game, and now I don't have to guess at what's happening. But wait, did I just mention tricks and my character somehow stayed planted on one single rail without hopping all over the place? Well, you've got an eye for details because that's exactly right. You've got 2 whole buttons this time for combo tricks, which lets you keep your speed up while jumping or on long rails, which is not only extremely helpful, but also just a fun thing to do instead of setting your controller to the side until the end of the rail. All of these improvements, big and small, make the game feel quicker, more engaging, easier to get a handle on than the first game. And don't worry, it still feels uniquely Jet Set Radio with that wide turning radius, semi-slippery feel because you're on rollerblades, and long floaty jumps, which feel even more at home in these larger levels with all the other quality of life changes surrounding them. Really, the only thing Sega forgot about was the Xbox controller has a second stick for the camera, which does nothing, unless you're standing still, so there's always something to fix in the third game, right? When I booted this game up, I came across a familiar sight. Buses parked, just waiting to be spray painted. Catwalks above, which let you grind and leap off onto awnings covering those same buses. It seemed eerily familiar to a location from the first game. Then later you skate down a giant hill of cobbled together roofs, but no, this is not a remake of the first game as far as I can tell, because there's a whole new story and a whole new crew, but you will see a lot of returning characters and locations along the way. All of it just gets expanded and refined. Each character from the first game gets a redesigned look and a more detailed stat sheet, with brand new characters appearing as well. And weirdly, just like the first game, you'll need to impress them so that they join your crew. But while picking between characters, which you can do on any level, their differences are better highlighted as they skate around the more expanded home base or garage, really showing off how Gum is faster than everyone else as she laps them on the course. Then there are the levels, which are larger than anything I remember in the first game. I mean, just look at the differences in the Shibuya bus stop between the two games. So these are less remakes of levels from the first game and more inspired by some of the areas from the first game. And where the first game had 3 levels broken up into sections, this game has a fully connected world that's split into around 15 interconnected levels, with you skating across the tops of skyscrapers, navigating massive multi-level sewers, cramped back alleys with winding apartment complex stairs, under construction highways, and even amusement parks that provide a lot of visual and gameplay variety as you start to open up more of the city. Luckily, you're given an overworld map this time, which is more of a tree of connections, plus the flat map images that were confusing from the first game are replaced with 3D models, which have handy labels on all the exits. Having the ability to rotate these maps of larger, more detailed levels helps a ton, though I do wish I could zoom and pan around some of the more detailed ones. And while objectives do show up sometimes, not everything does. And the tree-like overworld map never indicates where to go next, so you'll have to walk around your garage asking your crew for hints if you, let's say, ended the session the night before and forgot where you were headed next. Luckily, these larger levels contain even more things to do than the first game. Sure, all the objective types from the first game return, with races, that game of horse, and tagging objectives all showing up. But you'll participate in new events like a whole rollerblading arena sport, fill in for the bomb squad using the power of spray paint, destroying robots that are infecting the city, and more throughout the story mode, which always had me excited to see what the next objective would be. Plus, there are side objectives in each level with high score and combo challenges you can try and beat, and much like the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, there's a secret tape hidden in most levels for you to collect, as well as these graffiti souls that are actually marked on your map as these big orange dots. But the challenge is figuring out how to string together combos, boosts, and jumps to actually snag them. This feels so similar to the fun I have collecting skill points in the Tony Hawk series as you puzzle your way to reaching them, and I just love collecting these. And yes, of course, you'll be tagging things for a lot of the objectives, but you aren't constantly stopping and going like the first game, as now you can tag stuff while still skating, and even have new abilities to do a kind of slow grind, slide, to tag especially large spots while staying on the move, which gives the whole game just a quicker and more seamless feel for the modern skater on the move. Overall, I was just really happily surprised with how they tweaked existing objectives, built new ones, and filled these larger stages with more to keep you occupied this time. Now there is one thing that I'm mixed on, and that's the combat. On one hand, they made huge improvements to make the spray paint powered game of tag against rival gangs and dealing with the evil police force feel so much more manageable, with you gaining a lock-on ability, also introducing more ways to gain speed with that trick system, and the extremely helpful boost that lets you knock over almost anyone so you can get a good blast of paint on them. This game also introduces boss battles, some of which are surprisingly great, and feel free to skip to the next time code if you don't want to spoil a single boss mechanic, like this one, against a real Bionic Commando looking villain who launches their extending robot arm after you with so much force that if you dodge it, it sticks into the ground. And hey, doesn't that look suspiciously like a grind rail which could be used to close the distance and knock them over for some spray painting? This really is a perfect boss design for this game. It's just a shame there aren't more of them, because there are other bosses, but they don't do anything nearly as interesting, and some require a lengthy amount of platforming and grinding to get close to them, only to regularly get knocked down back to the bottom floor. And the battles against non-bosses have their problems as well. If you get knocked over and have to crawl away, it's really hard to get back up and away from your pursuers because they're surrounding you, so you kind of get stuck in a loop that's hard to get out of. It feels like a third game could have sanded off these last few rough edges and perfected the combat so you'd have a game filled with interesting boss battles and less frustrating non-boss encounters. But it's still a huge improvement from the first game. Now, with all that in mind, would I recommend that Jet Set Radio Future be on your backlog? Yeah, if you've ever been interested in the Jet Set Radio series, I feel like the amount of quality of life features here, along with just more everything, characters, levels, variety of things to do, which is all layered onto the unique gameplay style and music that the first game is known for, all add up to an easy recommendation. I just think this one's easier to get into and less frustrating overall than the last game, with almost all the things I didn't click with in the last game having been tweaked or changed for the better, I think. But I did really like the first game, and I love the Tony Hawk Pro Skater franchise, so this series is very much catering to a style of game that I enjoy, so your mileage might vary depending on how much you've enjoyed that genre of game in the past. Though I do feel that Jet Set Radio Future really stands out. And I'll throw out my normal message that my opinion on these games is not meant to tarnish any fond memories you have of playing these, and if you loved or still love these games, please tell me why in the comments below. I'd love to hear more about your experience and talk even more about these games. Now, if you're looking to play or replay Jet Set Radio Future, then the secondhand market is your only friend. This game has never been re-released anywhere. Luckily, a double pack of this game along with Sega GT 2002 was included in an original Xbox console bundle for a while, so there are plenty of copies out there for cheaper than the individual game's boxed copy. It is backwards compatible and can be played, but only on the 360 with a disc copy, and it was never added or enhanced through the later Xbox One or Xbox Series backwards compatibility programs, which is a shame because I bet this game, as well as the first, would look incredible even with just a bump in resolution. But I have to assume, much like the Tony Hawk games and other extreme sports games out there, the amount of music licensing required to get this re-released is probably why this and so many other games with incredible soundtracks have been stuck in a limbo of sorts. And while there have been rumors and leaks for years that the Jet Set Radio series would return, as of this video, we still have no concrete confirmation or announcement. But there is that indie game I mentioned at the start of the video, Bomb Rush Cyberfunk, which looks to, at the very least, draw some inspiration from the Jet Set Radio series. And I have no inside scoop or connection to this game. I'm just a fan that's got extremely high hopes for this, as the developers, Team Reptile, have made some really fun games in the past, being probably best known for Lethal League, the fighting/baseball game with extremely snappy, satisfying combat that I'm horrible at, and the overlooked but extremely fun Megabyte Punch, which I really enjoyed and feels like if Metabots and Custom Robo merged with the combat systems of Super Smash Bros. So hopefully this semi-spiritual successor Bomb Rush Cyberfunk can carry the torch of the excellent Jet Set Radio Future. But that's it for this episode of BacklogBusters. Have you played Jet Set Radio Future? What did you think? Should it be on others' backlogs? Let me know. I'd love to talk more about this game and the series. And if you've got a suggestion for another game I should clear off my backlog, please let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you'd like to see more, tap the subscribe button. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.